Okay, continuing Ishimaru Jiro's interview with Kim Min-bin, pseudonym of this North Korean official. It's an extensive interview. Here we see a picture of Hyesan, sort of abandoned factory. It's interesting, by the way, this picture was taken in 2002, 2003, and they say it was abandoned. This exact facility was belching smoke when I was there in 2009, so I think it's important these photos be put into context. I'm glad they put the dates on everything. This is a very specific text. Also, we see Kim Jong-il there in 1983, I believe, with Deng Xiaoping, and of course the lovely spittoon, Deng Xiaoping's characteristic spittoon sitting between the two of them. All right, why China? Why the pictures of China? Why the thoughts of Hyesan? Because this official goes on to describe the copying of China. Utilitarianism. Copying China 20 years late. I must discuss utilitarianism, which has been loudly promoted recently. It would be fine if utilitarianism was actually implemented as our interpretation of economic guidance, but presently in North Korea it is nothing other than worship of the powerful. In other words, it is to seek truth from facts and imitate the reform and opening implemented in China. Interesting, he knows this Dengist phrase, to seek truth from facts. Which means, Ishimaru says, unleashing a long tirade here. To summarize, after the cessation of the Korean War on July 27th, 1953, typo, says 1950, North Korea became addicted to the habit of creatively imitating the great power that is China. As a small country, it tried its best to imitate the Chinese experience and results, as the PRC had a head start on the revolution. But it was in a bad position because all it received from China was training from a technical team. While continuing to court Beijing, North Korea eventually established for its own political interests the concept of independence or self-reliance. Juche. Articles can often be seen in Nodong Sinmun, the official Workers' Party newspaper, claiming there are many believers in this Juche idea around the world. It is a bitter irony that the country that made such an issue of independence depends more on the outside than anywhere else. For validation, that is. If we follow the chronology of history, we see that the Cholima movement, the late 1950s, was an imitation of China's Great Leap Forward. People's communes were communal farms. The Cultural Revolution was copied in the three revolutions in ideology, technology, and culture. Even after Mao Zedong died in 1978, sorry, 1976, you're wrong, Kim Jong-il visited China in June 1983 and was accepted as the North Korean successor. North Korea then was chronologically not far behind China as its imitator. But the time lag for this copying increased since the mid-1980s with Deng Xiaoping's rise to power. By that point, North Korea had fallen into trouble imitating China's system because the Cold War had begun to thaw, and the world was transitioning from a time of opposition to a time of reconciliation, cooperation, and exchange. Those of you interested in North Korea as a Soviet-based state and Stalinist and Soviet in every way, note the absolute lack of discussion of Gorbachev, glasnost, things like that. You can get that in the discussions of the diplomats who were in Europe at the time, and like Im Dienst des Diktators, and others who are more plugged-in interviewers who were stationed around the world. There's a French text, Evides de Corée du Nord, that interviews a long interview with a guy who was in Congo at the time, Belgian Congo, French speaking place, and is thinking more about glasnost, Soviet Union, etc. But this guy who's in North Korea, the dangers of the 80s, the reform, the open, it's all comes from China. Think about that. I will. Page 80. Despite the fact that every idea and decision in North Korea existed only by copying a great power, as they pretended to study the successes of China or the USSR, even the cadre themselves were fooled. The truth also remained hidden from the people. The regime came to paint the threat of invasion by enemy countries as the foundation of proper governmental control. Through this process, the powerful came to think only of how to preserve their own entrenched interests. So by the time real reform started in China, they were unable to duplicate it. They were unable to determine which direction to go from there. The seeking truth from facts that had begun in China decades ago is finally being introduced today when conditions are a little better for acceptance. It goes by the name utilitarianism, and it's said that, quote, creative revisions are being made based on North Korea's real situation and interests. The first reason why North Korea decided to undertake utilitarianism was because the state's planned economy had become a mere facade. The truth is that most companies still in operation have become foreign currency procurement businesses, controlled as special organizations under the party, military, or police. As a result, the large gap in wealth between the powerful government class and the common people has become a fixture of society. The party, state, and society have lost the people's character of socialism, with growing inequality and economic opportunity. Even if the powerful were judged to be corrupt, there is no way to restrain them even as historically unprecedented mass starvation and homelessness run rampant. On the other hand, powerful anger at the growing wealth of the powerful has increased, making it impossible for them to avoid responsibility. It is clear, both in the cities and the villages, that there is no way for the economy to recover without serious reform, so that the introduction of utilitarianism became unavoidable. Even at the start of the Shogun, or military-first government, in 1998, it was also necessary to promote utilitarianism. That was because the true consequence of military promotion was a competition to amass personal fortunes, and the introduction of utilitarianism was associated with increased opportunities for such wealth accumulation. That is probably one reason why relations temporarily eased between the military-first government and the international community. Long editorial note there by the editor, we'll leave that out. But our country's utilitarianism is riddled with defects compared with China's reform. We have not opened to the outside, and our economic reforms are empty, used only to preserve the entrenched interests of the military-first elite. In conclusion, North Korea's utilitarianism has not resulted in economic structural reforms designed to stimulate society's productive activity and promote a healthy business environment. Rather, it has only further exacerbated the corruption among those in power. Final question in this beastly interview, 60-plus pages long. Ishimaru says, "I would like to hear about the succession problem and Jang Song-taek." K responds, "If any member of the central cadre class opens his mouth about the succession problem, he will immediately be reported to the Central Party. What limited level of talk is allowed is that Kim Jong-il's son is still young, but he's thinking of making him the successor. If he is to be the successor, at the least there needs to be some preparation in which he is gradually introduced to the public." Keep in mind, the interview takes place in 2006. But at this point, there is nothing like that. The internal economy is collapsing, so no one is in the mood to address the successor problem. It is apparent Jang Song-taek has finished his revolution and started back to work. In other words, he's purged. He's been removed from his job, suspended. However, at end of 2005, he was appointed as the party's first vice chairman of the Capital Reconstruction Committee, and he's just below Kim Jong-il now in the party hierarchy. The reason for his revolutionization, in other words, his thought reform or reform, had to do with money, but it appears not to have been a big issue. Yet he has the reputation of being just a small player. Supposedly the enemies around him continue to apply a lot of pressure. In the 1990s, at the same time that the state and society fell into deep ruin, there was a big change in values through a generational shift. Now that the international environment is different from during the Cold War, there's no point in paying attention to the older generation, who will be weeded out by natural selection either way, referring to Jang Song-taek. Although there is no one on the horizon at the moment, some new group from the next generation will probably appear to take the helm. People are waiting for new leadership capable of guiding North Korea into the new age. The country must both open itself and be able to adequately deal with a complicated, diverse international community. Our country seeks those with this kind of vision and ability. Thanks, Rimjingang and Ishimaru Jiro. 2010. Interesting and excellent text.